Welcome back. If you just joined in Single Parent Corner, you missed a great segment about the Martin Luther King celebration. And as you know, we are talking about self-evaluation this month for this year. And I'd like to introduce to you, I'm honored to have him in the studio as well, a professor from the College of Charleston. His name is Mr. Damon Fordham.
How are you, Mr. McCottry?
Fine. How are you doing, Mr. Fordham?
Wonderful, ma'am. Wonderful.
Thank you so much for joining the Single Parent Corner. Now, we want to talk about, as I said, our theme is self-evaluation. But before we get to that, I'd like for you to tell the audience what you teach at the university.
All right. I teach U.S. history and African American studies, but I also make it a point to do a lot of outside speaking so the people who aren't in the colleges will get this information also.
Okay. Now that's wonderful, and that's why you're coming on Single Parent Corner, because as I said, the theme for this month is self-evaluation. In Single Parent Corner, we feel that this year we want everybody to take an assessment of themselves. So since you teach history, what I wanted to find out from you is if you could give us some aspects about history as it relates to oneself, you know, the attitudes that we have about oneself, and where that might have played a role in history.
Well, it plays a major role in history because what you had was whenever you have an oppressed group, particularly women, African Americans, or even the poor whites, as a matter of fact, the dominant society would often teach these people that they were less than what they actually were. Mm-hmm. Deliberately indoctrinate them and teach them that they were less than what God intended them to be. And that way, once they were taught that, they would serve a subservient role in society or be used as cheap labor. Like I said, the same is true with women in general, the same is true with African Americans, the same is true with the poor whites, especially in the southern United States.
Oh, okay. As far the way history is, we were talking about this earlier, as far as self-esteem as being one of those major issues. How did that play a role in history? You know, you're talking about an oppressed group, but there are several groups that have been oppressed. Native Americans as well, you know, at one point were oppressed. How do you see self-esteem as a major issue?
Well, if you've believed what you've been taught, let's say if you were a member of an oppressed group and you were taught that you were lazy and illiterate and good for nothing, oftentimes people tend to internalize that, and even worse, they teach it to their children. Because for many years, for example, women were taught by their parents that they couldn't do certain things. Many African Americans were given negative messages as children from their parents who may have internalized it, and the same is true, as you mentioned earlier, with the Native Americans. But it's key to studying this and knowing this when you face it so that you can handle it in a proper fashion.
Exactly. Now, as you know earlier, some of the viewers that missed, I was talking with Miss Christine Jackson, the Executive Director of the YWCA. We were talking about the Martin Luther King celebration. Let's take a twist a little bit about history. With the Martin Luther King celebration, we're coming into, as we know, African American history in February, but still history itself plays a role. Like Ms. Jackson said, when we celebrate Martin Luther King's his birthday, it's not just for African Americans, it's for everybody, because he opened up the floodgates for everybody. How does that relate to history as it is in our everyday life, as far as eliminating racism? Can you give me some feel about history? And
very much so, because see, it's not often taught that Dr. King was influenced by the Indian leader Mohandas Gandhi. Because he was open to that, he was able to take what he learned from Gandhi and apply it to the African American situation. One of his associates, as a matter of fact, was a Jewish rabbi named Dr. Abraham Heschel. And because he was not a racist person, he was open to Dr. Heschel's advice upon forming his civil rights strategy. So one of the lessons that people other than African Americans can learn from the experience of Dr. King is to be open to people who are different than you so that you could learn something from them to enrich your life. Whereas if you were closed-minded, you would miss a whole lot from other people that may be able to teach you something.
Exactly. And you told me about your experience going on the road. Operation Understanding is one of the things that you do. Tell me a little bit about that.
Operation Understanding was a group of Jewish and African American students that traveled through major areas of the country dealing with major issues of Jewish and African American history. We visited Holocaust museums, as well as many places in the South where the Civil Rights Movement took place. And it was through that experience that the children began to understand each other's culture and to begin to deal with each other as friends and as human beings rather than just blacks or Jewish people.
Exactly. And how did you see with that, how did it help those students? What were some of the reactions from that tour?
I'm glad you asked me that. We had an incident in Birmingham where we were in a Chinese restaurant and some jokes about Asians were being told, and one of the students got up and told us to remember that we were in Birmingham where 4 little girls were killed by intolerance. And by telling and making those types of jokes, we were just passing on intolerance. So I was really impressed that one of them learned and took that to heart to the degree that he was able to get up in face of possible opposition from his peers to make a stand against something like that. So we all learned from it.
Exactly. And that's what I'm saying. This show, as I said, this year, we're focusing on assessing ourselves. And this is self-evaluation. And as I try to get across to the viewers, that it's important that we look within ourselves.
That's right.
And a lot of the reason I had you come on the show was because you are a history teacher. And what better way to learn than from history? As I teach my students in the class that I teach, history, economics, and your culture. And you must do that and understand each other's cultures and each other's history. And that's why you're here today, because you teach all of this U.S. history and you can share all these things with us. So I wanted to find out from you, what tips would you give some of our parents out there about teaching their children about history?
I would encourage parents to be as open as possible to these type of things. I encourage parents to go to the libraries and ask the librarians which books would be available and appropriate for their children so that they could teach the children themselves in case the schools don't teach it to them. Because as Martin Luther King's father once said, you cannot lead where you do not go, and you cannot teach what you do not know.
All right. All right. If someone needs to get in touch with you, Mr. Fordham, how can they call you?
They could call me at the College of Charleston's History Department. My office there is 953-7327.
Okay.
Okay, I'm there mostly in the afternoons, Monday through Friday.
Monday through Friday. And as I asked Ms. Jackson, what would be your one word of inspiration for our viewers?
My one word for inspiration, learn.
All right. You heard it right here on the Single
Learn so you can understand what's going on around you.
That's right. That's right. Mr. Fordham, thank you so much for joining
us. Thank you very much, Dr.
Corner. It was very informative, and I hope that you got something out of it as well. Next, we're going to take a break right now, and we'll be right back.